Hey YouTubers, it's Charlie. This is going to be my American Gods Episode 1 video. Just careful for spoilers if you haven't seen it yet. This has been one of the shows I've been looking forward to all year. Brian Fuller did an amazing job. All the actors, all the performers, the visual style was crazy. I love the way they opened it with that Viking sequence, explaining pretty much everything you need to know about the series, about how the gods came to America. So if you're new to the channel, I am doing an American Gods giveaway for all the episode videos that I'm doing. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber, leave a comment on the video. It's just like my Game of Thrones giveaways. It's basically for a $20 Amazon gift card. So just like the other videos, I'll do top 10 WTF and Easter eggs as I go along. I'll explain what some of the symbolism means. There's some very special objects like the coin that he got from Mad Sweeney, as well as the gallows, the buffalo, Mr. Wednesday. So I'll try to explain what everything is, what they represent, and what's going on just based on this episode, because there's still a lot of stuff they haven't revealed yet. So number 10, coming to America, Mr. Ibis explains how people brought their gods with them to America, starting with the Vikings and the god Odin. And it explains in this very wonderful, artful way how it is that gods are invoked, how sacrifice brings them, and very literally what it is that Odin wants to grant his boon. He wants blood to be shed, he's a battle god, he wants people to make war. That gives him his power. So the Vikings kill a couple of each other, Odin is appeased and brought to America, like he's physically invoked and manifests in America, even though you don't physically see what he looks like, mostly because they don't want to tip the hat too soon. Most of you, if you know the etymology of the word Wednesday, where that comes from Woden, what does that sound like? It sounds like Odin. So they pretty much reveal everything you need to know about the series, where it's headed, what they can do, what their powers are, in a much more open way than the book ever did. So the book kept a lot of its secrets till the very end. But the really beautiful thing that the TV series is doing is showing you all of its cards up front, being very honest about who these characters are. I can see through you, Shadow, with my one eye, so most of you probably figured that out in this episode. But Mr. Ibis, the one who's keeping a record of all this, who's narrating this, is also the god Thoth, who's the ancient Egyptian god of writing, wisdom, and magic. So it's basically his job to narrate what's going to be happening this season. So you touch base with him every once in a while. And most of the big main characters that Shadow runs into are gods in some form or another. But number 9, we meet Shadow and Loki Lie Smith. So what does that name sound like? Loki, which is a really funny twist. But he says, I smell snow. So Loki Lie Smith starts spinning all these tales. He just has word vomit coming out of him. And it sounds a little bit like nonsense. But what he's trying to do is get Shadow to open his mind. Shadow says, I only believe things that I can see. So a big part of Shadow's arc through the course of the series, and the reason he has the visions of the bison, the world tree, which I'll explain in a second, is because he's slowly opening his mind to the supernatural world. Gods do exist. But he hasn't quite learned that yet, what his role is, and why it is that it always gets really overcast and snows when he gets really anxious. So like you notice as he goes to bed and he's really pensive, it starts snowing outside his window. But the dream he has, I totally love the cinematography and the way they transition from his conscious mind to his sleeping mind as he sees Laura. Then you transition to the bone orchard, which is a metaphor for all the death that's coming. So all this is foreshadowing for things that are going to come to pass. So it's very literally dead bodies just all around the world tree. It claws at him. So what he's seeing here is the world tree from Norse mythology looking like it's trying to take him and hang him, like you see the noose hanging down here. He saw that earlier during the day. Then later in the episode, he literally gets hung from a tree. So all these are things that are going to come to pass. So you notice that as he's dreaming, he's getting visions of the future, some supernatural force at play that's trying to explain to him what's going on. But he hasn't quite broadened his mind yet, so he doesn't really know what to make of it. It's all still very confusing. And he hasn't referenced it at all during the day. So the title of the episode was The Bone Orchard. It's just foreshadowing what's to come. There's this big war that's been teased between the gods, the old gods and the new gods. That's what all the imagery with the battle at the beginning of the episode was about. They pretty much told you what the entire plot of the series was. So Shadow is getting a vision of the graveyard of everyone's bodies. That's why they call it the Bone Orchard, because Bone Orchard is another term for graveyard. So he's witnessing all these supernatural graves here. So War of the Gods, a bunch of people are going to die, but you have to remember that this is a supernatural war, so it's not people fighting people, it's gods fighting gods. But I love number 8, do not piss off those bitches in airports. So this is another lesson from Loki, trying to get him to see things in very simpler terms, trying to get him to broaden his mind. So he tells him this big parable about how a prisoner got out of prison, went to the airport, pissed off one of the women at the airport, and ended up right back in prison. So one, it's an example of someone trying to exert influence on Shadow and get him to go in a certain direction that Shadow might not necessarily go in on his own. Like he probably would have thrown down and gotten thrown back in prison because he has a temper. You start to see that as he starts fighting Mad Sweeney. Totally love Ian McShane's intro, playing the fool, trying to get the first class upgrade, just showing you what an amazing con man Mr. Wednesday is. And Ian McShane just does it so well. He just acts circles around everybody else. But all the actors on the show were great. But I love the way that he's talking to Shadow, being so upfront. He covers all the basic concepts about how faith keeps the plane up, faith keeps the gods up. So everything that Mr. Wednesday says is a metaphor for what's going on in the series and what's coming up. So if it sounds like there's some hidden meaning in the things that he's saying, like I have one eye, or the cashews, the metaphor of the cashews was great too. So he says, they grow in another country, just like gods come from a different country, gods come from all over the world, all different religions, but they thrive in America, just like cashews. So that's sort of a hat tip for later in the episode when you see the Bilquis scene where she's adapted to new forms of worship, using the dating service to get the faith and the prayers that she needs to get her power. Probably the most important thing that Mr. Wednesday says, though, and he's very final about it, is when he says, I usually get my way given enough time. It's just a matter of faith. So he also sort of subverts Shadow's coin trick later, which I'll talk about. It's also on my list because the coin trick was a big part of the episode, where Shadow reveals to him that he's also something of a con man. He's amazing with coin tricks, and he can always get it to come up tails, except when he's flipping against Mr. Wednesday. So they don't really explain it till Mad Sweeney comes up. But I'll say number 7, what's today? Wednesday. Let's go with that. So that's just a way of showing you that gods have many different names. The fact that he's finding Shadow on a Wednesday is no coincidence, so that'll play in later in the series, so I don't want to reveal too much up front. But if you want, you can read the book ahead. But a lot of these circumstances seem engineered. That's because they are. It is no coincidence that Wednesday, Odin found Shadow on a Wednesday. So it must be my lucky day, but you come to find out eventually that pretty much every day is Mr. Wednesday's lucky day. But this is so cool. When Shadow finally goes to sleep on the plane, you meet the buffalo for the first time, standing next to the world tree. So he keeps going back to this place, but the buffalo speaks to him and says, believe, with Mr. Wednesday's voice. So it might be confusing, but they just want you to think that there's something supernatural about Mr. Wednesday because he hears his voice speaking from the buffalo. But in the book, the buffalo itself is a representative of the land. So it's like the land has an avatar, just like other gods have avatars walking around. Like Sweeney says that he's a leprechaun. So when you're speaking to the buffalo, you are very literally speaking to the earth itself. But in the book, the buffalo is a completely different character that isn't really connected to Mr. Wednesday. It's the earth trying to speak to Shadow, trying to get him to open his mind. Number 6, torture in the Bilquis scene. So you see Shadow going down the road screaming, these clouds sort of come out over him, almost like he's calling the weather with his rage. And you transition to the dating service that Bilquis has where she meets with the man, takes him to bed, and then basically just consumes him through his prayers and makes herself younger. So that's how she takes her powers in. But it was so well done. And if you're wondering how they pulled off that crazy trick, there was a trap door beneath the bed, so the actor would like slip underneath as they were filming that, and just a little crazy camera work just to make him seem like he was getting smaller and smaller. But if you're wondering what her powers are, she's the Queen of Sheba and a Jinn, and it's just a way of showing you how she's adapted to new forms of worship, but she draws on their faith in the same way. That's why he has to pray to her for her to get that power. But such a great transition to the crocodile's mouth. So number 5 and 4, the coin toss and then Shadow sealing the deal. So he bets heads or tails, and I explained a little bit about how Shadow can win any coin toss. He's a master with coin tricks, except when he's flipping against Mr. Wednesday, because as you learn through Mad Sweeney's character, that it's much easier to pull them out of thin air, because Shadow's like, what's the trick? I don't understand. He does it by sleight of hand, just like a normal magician would, but Mad Sweeney, who's a leprechaun, has supernatural power. He just pulls coins out of thin air. So that's why he jokes about it being so difficult to hide all those coins up your sleeves. That sounds like too much trouble, but that sort of helps you understand why it is that he can't win the coin toss against Mr. Wednesday, because Mr. Wednesday is using his power. And the way they seal the deal is very important too. The second one seals the deal, the third one's the charm. So a seemingly meaningless ritual like sharing a drink with your friend in a very special way, very specific way, actually invokes a very special ancient power. It's just a way of showing you that there is power in ritual, but that the ritual itself is very important. The intent behind it is also important, but you have to do it in a certain way. He had to take all 3 shots of that mead in order to seal the bargain, seal the bond between them, which is also part of what helped save him when the technical boy was getting ready to murder him. So I'll explain that at the end of this. But if you didn't spot it, there was an Easter egg here. When he's looking at the obituary, Dane Cook plays Robbie, the person that died in the car crash with his wife Laura. But I just love the way that a couple of the characters like Mr. Wednesday are a little more roundabout in the way they try to reveal information to Shadow, but Sweeney comes right out super drunk. I'm a leprechaun, it's magic. He is 100% upfront about everything. Do you know Wednesday? Do you know who he really is? Do you know what he really is? And Shadow's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Then they get into the fight over the special gold coin, a very special gold coin. I really want to explain what the coin is, but they haven't revealed what it's going to do now that it's sunk into Laura's grave. But you've actually seen her in the trailer, so I'll say spoiler warning when I get ready to explain that. But number 3, the funeral. So you go and Robbie's wife gets all crazy, explains how they died. So I know it seems like they're trying to throw Laura under the bus, make her seem like this unfaithful wife, but you have to remember that a lot of these circumstances seem like they were engineered by outside forces. Like all of this is intended to drive Shadow towards a destiny that he isn't aware of yet, that he's slowly awakening to. So actually, just to jump back, Mr. Wednesday, when he's trying to hustle for that first class seat, he says he's trying to get to his nephew's christening. That was kind of like the mead that he shared with Shadow. It's part of the ritual. So it's almost like Shadow is getting his christening. So they really are revealing a lot of stuff up front. I know she gets super crazy. It's so funny, like her flipping out. I'm trying to get a little bit of my dignity back. Don't be so crazy, as he tosses the coin onto the grave and it sinks beneath the ground. So without completely giving the coin away, I will say that the coin itself is very important. Number 2, Shadow meets the technical boy, and there are a couple big changes from the book here. The technical boy is the god of the internet. So what they do on the TV show, because modern day internet is much more about virtual reality, emerging technology, so that's why he speaks to Shadow through that virtual reality environment using the facehugger device. That was so cool. When the book was originally written in the early 2000s, the internet was still dial-up, so the limo that they met in was an actual real-life limo, and it was more of like this pudgy little boy, like somebody who lived in his mother's basement. But the technical boy of the TV show is made to reflect the modern internet of today, which is vastly different from what it was like in the early 2000s. So he questions him about Mr. Wednesday. Shadow still hasn't quite figured out what's going on. All he knows is that he's there to protect Mr. Wednesday. He doesn't know anything about him other than he's not what he seems. So they take him out, they hang him up, and then all of a sudden the technical boy's men just burst into gore all around him with this unseen force attacking them, saving Shadow's life. They're very cryptic about it, but it's basically Mr. Wednesday saving Shadow through his power because of the bond that they sealed with the mead. That's one of the important benefits. And actually, I almost forgot to mention, when Wednesday is telling Shadow what the terms of their deal are, that is very important foreshadowing for the future. In the unlikely event of my death, you must stand vigil over my body. Very important for later in the series, so remember everything that Mr. Wednesday says. If it seems like it's an offhanded turn of phrase, it's not. There is deeper meaning in everything that comes out of Mr. Wednesday's mouth. So the explosion of gore was actually my number 1, but let me know, what was your favorite moment from the episode, and what are your big questions about the gods? They pretty much explain everything you need to know about the series in the first episode, where they're headed, what the conflict is, what the terms are, what they're fighting over. They're fighting over faith, how we're all building towards this big bone orchard towards the end of the series. So they're not going to cover every single thing in the book the first season, but depending on your guys' interest level and how this video does, I'll do videos week to week, or at least a video for every couple episodes, but they're only 8 episodes, so we'll see how it goes. While you wait for my next video, you can click here for a brand new Game of Thrones, and you can click here for brand new Infinity War. Thank you so much for watching. Let's high five. I'll see you guys tonight.